Today, I'll share some of the work that I've done on adolescent motivation and learning to make 2 points. One is that rather than the individual differences that adolescents and children bring into the learning context, or the contextual variations, what's more important, and actually I should say most important, is that adolescents' belief of their motivation that have fundamental influence and strongest influence on their motivation, self-regulation, and learning. That's the first point that I'll be making throughout this presentation. The second point that I'll be making is that it is critically important that researchers assess these motivational beliefs in a very context-specific way. So by that I mean, if your goal is to predict their performance and achievement in a particular domain, you should ask questions about their motivation at the same level. So ask them about their motivation in that domain. If your prediction goal is to see how they behave on this particular task, then you have to ask the questions about their motivation, their confidence and value and interest toward that particular task. All right. Okay. You see a lot of different terms here. Many of them are probably familiar to you if you work in the field of psychology. Now, can you see some of the similarities and differences among these terms? Hopefully, you can probably see that most of these terms have something to do with perceived competence. And hopefully, you can probably also see the difference, and it's actually a dead giveaway because I've already shown you the title, that there is difference between these terms in terms of how context-specific ways that you could possibly assess these terms. Some of these constructs can be assessed at a very context-specific level, but some of these constructs cannot be. All right, let me ask you a different question. All right, so here, how confident are you that you can successfully deal with situations that involve some type of computation? And please try to rate your confidence on a 0 to 100 response scale. Let me show you some of the slightly different situations that involve slightly different type of computations. You have to pay for something, all right? Oh, you have done some grocery shopping and now you're at the cashier. Obviously, you need to do some computation there. I and my daughter had to purchase 2 train tickets, the JR line, to come here from the Kansai International Airport. We had to figure out how much we have to pay. McDonald's, our favorite family visit on weekends. How many family members or friends you bring, what kind of menus they want, again, another situation that involves computation. Bank, definitely. Very complex computation. Who has what cars, how much they're betting and all that. All right. The last situation, computational confidence. Okay. How many of your confidence just went up by seeing this problem? How many just went down? Okay. The point that I'm trying to make out of this exercise is that when you're asking about people's confidence about computation in general, as I have like a minute ago, then they have vague ideas about their confidence. Now, when their question is focused more toward a particular domain, like mathematics, the confidence fluctuates a little bit. As the situation becomes more and more specific, like what about algebra? Not geometry or trigonometry or simple arithmetic, but we're talking about algebra within the domain of mathematics. Now your confidence is still different. How about your confidence for solving that particular type of equations? Or that specific problem? Or even more specifically, how about that specific equation problem in that very context? Now, I can even make this question even more specific by adding some of the contextual constraints and affordances. For example, can I use a calculator? That makes the situation a lot different. Or do I have to solve this problem successfully within 3 minutes? Or do I have 30 minutes? Do I have to solve this problem alone? Or, oh my God, in front of my teacher? Or how about in front of 50 strangers in a very public manner? If you imagine yourself in these different situations, you can see even the very specific situation of solving this very particular equation problem, and your confidence toward that situation fluctuates a great deal. Okay. All right. Some of you might ask, do students really form these context-specific beliefs and act with these beliefs in achievement-related situations? And obviously my answer is yes. Let me show you the result of one study that we have conducted and published in Education Technology and Research and Development a couple years ago. Here, the question goes like this. We were interested in which type of self-efficacy predicts students' performance in web-based biology classes most accurately at the end of it. So basically, we examined the specificity and correspondence issue between self-efficacy and its prediction target proposed by Bandura and Frank Harris. Basically, what these researchers argued is that if you're interested in performance and learning in a broader domain or a specific domain, and depending on the prediction target, if you're interested in predicting the performance in the broader domain, you have to ask the questions that are framed against that broader domain. However, if you're interested in any type of particular learning and performance situations and performance in that situation, you have to tailor your questions and ask students about motivation to perform successfully on that very particular task. So we basically tested this hypothesis. This was the research design. It was a 5-log biology classes, and the teacher conducted this biology classes in a web-based manner. So during the first week, we asked students to report their self-efficacy for self-regulated learning. How confident are they to be in control on top of their learning? We also asked their academic self-efficacy to learn and perform successfully in the domain of biology. All right? We also asked them about their typical use of cognitive strategies, and we also gave them some opportunity to play with the internet and engage in some type of information searching kind of activities. During the second week, we asked students to report on the basis of their experience, their confidence to successfully use the internet for their learning and performance purposes within the context of this web-based biology classes. They were engaged in 3-week-long biology classes in a web-based fashion, and on the 5th week, they took 2 different tests, which I'll explain a little bit more about later. The participants were 152 Korean middle school students. And as I told you, we assessed self-efficacy for self-regulated learning, academic self-efficacy in biology, and internet self-efficacy. We also had some measures of learning and performance. So as I told you already, we asked them to report their typical use of cognitive and self-regulatory strategies. And again, this is a key difference of our study from previous studies, is that we had 2 different performance tests. Both tests cover the topics and concepts that they learned during their past 3 weeks of web-based biology classes. However, performance 1 was based on paper and pencil, a very typical test that students are familiar with. The second performance test, however, was a computer-based test. So the topic covered and concepts covered in this test are basically the same as what they've learned during the past 3 weeks. However, what they had to do differently from the paper and pencil test is that they had to do some internet search at the spot in front of the computer to locate the information necessary to answer the questions on the test. Okay? And here's a result. Okay. Now, the self-efficacy for self-regulated learning, consistent with the literature, predicted students' academic self-efficacy in biology, their typical use of cognitive strategies and self-regulatory strategies, as well as their use of internet. So, there's no surprise there. What's the prior achievement in biology predicted their self-efficacy for self-regulated learning and their academic self-efficacy in biology, but not necessarily their internet self-efficacy. And this academic self-efficacy predict cognitive strategy use as well as students' performance on the written test scores, but not the internet-based test score, although both tests cover the same topics. Now, students' computer experience predicted their self-efficacy toward using the internet, obviously. And this internet self-efficacy predicted their performance on this biology class that was web-based. So here, we demonstrated the differential predictive utility of basically the same construct, students' confidence towards successful learning and performance. But these same beliefs had very different predictive utility depending on the context under which they were assessed and depending on the prediction target that they were used. All right? Do these beliefs then, like you've seen just now, always work separately? And my answer is no. Sometimes they work together to they work together to improve students' self-regulation and learning and performance. Let me show you one example again from our previous research. Here the research question was, we were interested in whether academic self-efficacy and individual interest in a particular subject domain are both predictive of performance. Now, the predictive utility of academic self-efficacy for students' learning and performance is well established in the literature. What we're interested in was, what about interest? Now, interest, your liking of the subject matter, your enjoyment of the subject matter, your excitement while learning a subject matter. Individual interest is an affective motivational variable. In comparison, self-efficacy is a social cognitive motivational variable. Now, we were interested, okay, so we know this thing helps. What about we add individual interest into the situation? Will that help? Or maybe the prediction afforded by this construct is so strong, adding interest to the situation won't help that much. Okay? We hypothesize on the basis of the literature that self-efficacy will predict achievement. Also on the basis of the literature, we also predicted that when students feel more confident about their capability to learn successfully in the subject matter, they will set higher goals, and that higher goal will lead to better achievement. Okay? Also, the literature suggests to us, although nobody has directly tested it in this exact fashion, that when you set higher goals, then students tend to engage in better self-regulation, and that helps achievement as well. Now, in this Bayesian model, we sort of threw in the interest variable. Now, self-efficacy and interest in the same subject matter areas are known to be positively correlated. However, nobody really tested the path from interest. No, I should take it back. Nobody that I know of has tested the predicted path of interest to self-regulation or great goal, although many researchers have investigated the relationship between interest and achievement in a correlational fashion. So we hypothesized that interest will help self-regulation, and self-regulation, again, will help achievement. We were additionally interested in several other paths, like what about the direct path from self-efficacy and self-regulation? In other words, do you really need to set a goal to have the effect of self-efficacy to play out in the form of better achievement? Or self-efficacy directly predicts performance? Another path we were interested in is what about the relationship between interest as an affective variable and goal setting as a very cognitive motivational thing? Will there direct relationship or not? Lastly, we were also interested in the direct relationship between interest and achievement. Again, like I told you, many researchers have examined the direct relationship, pretty much in a correlational fashion, between interest and achievement and reported positive correlation. Now, we were wondering, is it really possible that the affective variable of interest directly leads to achievement without having to go through self-regulation? Because we thought maybe self-regulation is necessary as a mediating variable. All right. Again, the participants were 500 Korean middle school students, and we assessed all these variables in a very parallel manner in 4 different subject domains. And these 4 domains are typically considered as the most important subject matter areas in Korean secondary school. I'm I'm sure it's pretty much the same across countries, especially in Japan. But so Korean as our first language, and English as our second language, mathematics and science. So we assessed academic self-efficacy in those 4 subject domains. Interest, well, how much they like studying, interested in those 4 domains. And grade goal. What grade goal are you pursuing and be satisfied with? We also assess their use of cognitive and self-regulatory strategies. And we assess their use of rehearsal, elaboration, organization, metacognitive strategies, and effort management. And in particular, metacognitive strategy use was used as an index of self-regulation in our later structural equation modeling. All right? And we took their achievement scores in those 4 subject domains out of the school database. Okay, this is what students reported in terms of their typical use of these various cognitive and metacognitive strategies in the domain of Korean. Now, self-regulation or use of cognitive strategies. How many of you think that if students use these particular strategies at this level in Korean or one subject matter, for example, that particular student will show more or less similar level of strategy use in other domains? How many of you would expect that? Like high achieving students use this particular strategy this much, then that student will more or less likely to use that level of, that same strategy use in other domains. Anybody? My title just killed everything. I mean, this context. Okay, so you're right. See how the profile changes. This is Korean, English, mathematics, and science. In other words, a lot of teachers and parents assume, and students themselves, if you ask them, that they're using these strategies in a pretty much similar fashion. However, it wasn't the case. Depending on which subject matter domain that the questions were tailored against, their reported use of strategy was very different. Now then, this is a result that tested our hypothesized model. See, all those dotted path lines did not come through. In other words, this particular model, with only solid lines, demonstrated the best fit out of our structural equation modeling. And some of the paths demonstrated very significant gender differences. As we hypothesized self-efficacy and interest correlated positively with each other, self-efficacy predicted achievement directly as well as via the goal that students set in that particular subject matter domains. And grade goal helped them engage in better self-regulation, which helped them achieve better in that domain. Interest also helps students to engage in self-regulation better in that domain, as you see right here. However, interest did not predict grade goal or achievement directly. There are also interesting gender differences that consistently came out in at least 2 or 3 out of the 4 domains. One such path is this right here. Grade goal demonstrated significantly stronger relationship with achievement for girls. In other words, for girls, setting a higher grade goal was more important than it was for boys in Korean. All right. Basically the same pattern of results in English. Gender difference, again, it was more important for girls to achieve better. They have to set higher goals. Now, another interesting and consistent path that we observed in terms of gender difference was this path right here. And you could probably imagine this. Interest is more important for boys or girls? Boys. Interest was more important for boys. In other words, their individual interest in the subject matter domain was more strongly predictive of their achievement, subsequent achievement, than it was for girls in English, mathematics, as well as in science. And you see the stronger predictive utility of grade goal for girls in science as well. Okay? So, across 4 domains, self-efficacy helped students achieve better with the help of grade goal as a mediator. But interest also helped them achieve better by helping them engage in self-regulation in that particular domain. So, out of this research findings, what I tried to demonstrate to you is that context-specific motivational beliefs not only work separately from each other, as I shown you in the first example, they also complement each other. So if you have interest and self-efficacy in the domain, you are better. You're in a better position to self-regulate your learning and enjoy better achievement. Okay, the previous example is when they sort of demonstrate additive effects to each other. But what if there's a conflict? What if you believe, you believe certain subject matter domain is very important and interesting, but you lack confidence, right? Okay. We test this idea in a book chapter that we published, and the editor was Dennis McInerney, who was a presenter of this conference just a few years back, and others. Okay. Findings from the contemporary expectancy-value paradigm and research based on their paradigm told us that expectancy and value positively correlated with each other. It's very different from the Atkinson's original model where he hypothesized inverse relationship between value and expectancy. So if you expect to succeed in a very difficult task, then maybe the value is great because succeeding on a very difficult task will likely to make you more proud if you succeed on the task. Whereas if you succeed in an easy task, then you won't feel that much pride in succeeding on it because it's an easy task. Whereas Jackie Eccles and Alan Wakefield's later revised model of expectancy value paradigm, they hypothesized that value and expectancy constructs are positively correlated, especially among most kids and adolescents. And that is because, think about it, if you value something, you really think it's important and you want to do well, but you lack confidence, then it's painful. So a lot of students ended up doing what? Lowering the value of the domain that they lack confidence to feel better. It's a basic self-protection mechanism. But anyhow, so we were curious what's going to happen really when there's a conflict between students' value perception and their expectancy perception in the given domain. This is our observation. Most students, at least in Korean society, and I think it's pretty much the same in Japanese society as well, I'm not sure. Actually, I'm sure. But most students hold high task value toward academic areas. Unfortunately, not all of them feel confident about their capability to succeed in those valued subject domains. All right? So our research hypothesis was based on self-worth protection theory proposed by Covington. If students perceive high value in the task, but low self-efficacy for performing it, then they'll feel desperate and they'll resort to a lot of maladaptive motivational strategies to protect their self-worth. That was our hypothesis. Students can have high or low value. They can also have competence beliefs toward that domain, which can be high or low. Now, imagine a student who has low value but high competence. In other words, I don't think mathematics is that important. Nonetheless, I feel very confident in performing mathematics. No threat. If students have low value and low competence, in other words, I don't value mathematics that much, but I lack confidence in performing it. There's a little bit of threat there. So it's a low threat condition. But it's not a high threat condition. Moving to the right-hand column. What if you feel highly confident in performing a certain task and it's something that you value? Now again, the threat is not that much. Because you value it, there's a little bit of threat. Just in case there's a possibility you might fail, but you feel confident nonetheless, so the threat is not that high. It is when the value is high. You want to do well. You think it's important. You think it's interesting. You think it's useful, but you lack competence. You don't think you can do well. That is creating the high threat condition for most students and adolescents. So we tested this research hypothesis in this study. There's a longitudinal database called KELS, Korean Education Longitudinal Study that followed middle school students for about 7 years and beyond. And we took the data from the first two waves, which were available at that time. So the questions were referring to mathematics and English. Now, we asked, these questions were asked about students' 3 different types of value according to the Jackie Eccles expectancy-value paradigm. So, students reported their attainment value. In other words, how important is it that you successfully perform in this domain, either mathematics or English? How interesting it is for you, mathematics and English, how much do you enjoy it? How much do you find it interesting? Also, the utility value. How useful do you think it is to do well in mathematics and English? So that's the value perception assessed when they're in the 8th grade. We took the outcome variables at the second wave data set, which is the maladaptive strategies, including self-handicapping and test stress. Self-handicapping is when students engage in something that could possibly hamper their achievement result in order to create viable excuses for the potential failure. So like you have a test tomorrow, you get a call from your friends. Rather than saying no, that you have to prepare for this test, what you will say, oh yeah, sure. And then your excuse is that, oh, if I studied hard, I would have gotten a better score than this, but I got this call and I, played, and that's why I got this, unsatisfactory result. So you have a legitimate excuse. You create legitimate excuse for yourself as well as your parents and teachers. That's self-handicapping strategy. And we use the self-efficacy perception assessed at the 8th grade as a moderator to test our hypothesis of the interaction between the value and self-efficacy variables. Okay? The results confirmed, I shouldn't say confirmed, support our hypothesis. As you can see here, there's a clear difference depending on this is low self-efficacy, medium self-efficacy, and high self-efficacy group of students. For students who feel strongly confident about their belief, as their attainment value goes up, in other words, as they think mathematics and English is more as important, as their value belief goes up, they use less self-handicapping strategies. That is a typical finding. Okay? However, look at this low self-efficacy group of students. As they find the subject matter to be more important, they engage in greater self-handicapping. Same pattern with different value perception. High self-efficacy students, as they find mathematics and English more and more interesting, they use self-handicapping strategies less and less. However, for low self-efficacy students, as they find the subject matter to be more interesting, unfortunately, they reported using more self-handicapping strategies. Now, utility value is slightly different because all the 3 slopes are negative. However, the degree to which they use less self-handicapping as they find the subject matter to be more useful is actually the slope is a lot less steep for low self-efficacy students. So clear evidence of interaction between value and self-efficacy perception in support of our hypothesis. Test stress. This is a very sad graph, but regardless of the level of self-efficacy that you feel in the domain, and, high self-efficacy students, you cannot escape from feeling the test stress in Korean schools. So all 3 groups reported higher test stress as they believe the subject matter to be more important. However, the degree of feeling the test stress depends more heavily on the value perception for low self-efficacy students. Same thing for intrinsic value and utility value. Okay. So this experiment shows that there is a clear interaction between value perception and self-efficacy as an expectancy construct on students' use of maladaptive strategies. Because we relied on existing database in this study, we wanted to replicate this study and with a different group of students, which is high school students, and they're still Korean. Sorry, I live in Korea. But okay, so here's the result of that study. Again, a replication study. 591 Korean high school students participated in this research. The target domain was English as a foreign language. So we focused more specifically on the domain of English as a second language, whereas in previous research, the questions were asked about mathematics and English together. Independent variables were the same, self-efficacy and value perceptions. And in this particular research, we used a slightly different dependent variable. We were interested in academic cheating and procrastination. Okay. Results, unfortunately, were again very similar. The two high self-efficacy group students reported less cheating as they find their English as a second language domain to be more and more interesting and more useful. Especially the lowest self-efficacy group here and here reported as they find English to be more interesting and more useful, they reported engaging in greater degree of cheating. Okay. Procrastination, same pattern. Whereas the relationship, the trend between the two variables was not that strong among students with strong self-efficacy beliefs, the trend was unfortunately positive for students who's lacking confidence. So when they lack confidence to perform successfully in English, as they find English more interesting, they procrastinate. They don't, turn in their assignments in time. They don't start test prep in time and all that. And same thing with utility value. Okay. All right. So far, I've demonstrated a case where each context-specific motivation beliefs function separately by predicting the written test performance and the web-based test performance. In the second example, I presented a case where different motivation beliefs work together to improve their effects on self-regulated learning. Here, I presented evidence, hopefully, that context-specific motivation beliefs interact with each other. Okay. All right. And again, still, some of you might still have questions. What about the effect from individual difference characteristics students bring in to the learning and performance situations? Are these beliefs more important than individual differences? Okay. So let me show you this results of this particular recent study that we have conducted in our lab. The purpose here was that we were interested in the same question that you might ask. So are these domain-specific motivation beliefs are really more important than stable individual personality dispositions that students bring into the learning situations? In order to test this question, we recruited a little over 300 Korean middle school students. And we adopted the concept of multidimensional perfectionism proposed by Hewitt and Flett. And basically, they proposed that perfectionism has 3 different dimensions: self-oriented perfectionism, which is you're sort of basically torturing yourself to be perfect. Other-oriented perfectionism is you want to be perfect, not necessarily because of your own goal, but because other-oriented perfectionism, when you don't want to be a perfectionist, but you want other people to be perfectionists. Any of you who's married, maybe you're suffering from other-oriented perfectionism, I don't know. The other is socially prescribed perfectionism. You're trying to be perfect, not necessarily because of your own desire, but to please others and to meet the goal set for you by other people. Okay? Now, the other-oriented perfectionism for children and adolescents are, a little less relevant. So we only selected 2 dimensions: self-oriented perfectionism and socially prescribed perfectionism. Like I already explained to you, self-oriented perfectionists impose high self-standards upon themselves, evaluate their own performance against these standards, and strive to meet these standards. The critical difference of self-oriented perfectionists from socially prescribed perfectionists is that, again, both of them are engaging in striving demonstrating high striving to achieve the goal, but here, the goal and standards to evaluate their performance is not something self-generated, but imposed by others upon them, okay? All right. So we assessed self-oriented perfectionism and socially prescribed perfectionism. The dependent variables in this research include anxiety, cheating, academic procrastination, and achievement scores. And we assessed, the self-oriented perfectionism and socially prescribed perfectionism are two different dimensions of the single perfectionism construct. So consistent with the literature, they were highly positively correlated. However, when we look at the path they demonstrated to the dependent variables, this is what we found. Self-oriented perfectionism was a negative predictor of cheating and procrastination. It was a positive predictor of achievement. So as such, among the perfectionism dimension, it was an adaptive dimension. In comparison, socially prescribed perfectionism was a positive predictor of anxiety, cheating, as well as procrastination. So the same perfectionism construct, but which dimension that you're tapping makes a critical difference in terms of their predictive pattern. So socially prescribed perfectionism was a maladaptive dimension of the perfectionism. However, again, we were interested, again, not in these individual differences, but we're more interested in whether the context-specific motivational beliefs or the domain-specific motivational beliefs somehow override the effects from these stable personality dispositions. So we tested this model and found these results. Complex? Yes. Now, as you see, self-oriented and socially prescribed perfectionism and the dependent variables, and in the middle, there were domain-specifically assessed motivational variables that we threw in the model as a potential mediator. And we assessed all these variables in reference to mathematics and English. The numbers that you see to the left of the slash are from the mathematics model. The numbers that you see to the right of the slash are the numbers from the English domain. Now, the point that I'm trying to make here is that these four variables, self-efficacy, in other words, the student's subjective convictions that they can successfully learn and perform in that particular academic domain, and students' mastery goal orientation. In other words, they engage in achievement-related behaviors for the purpose of learning new things, and by doing that, improving their competence. Any of you who are familiar with achievement goal orientation research would probably know what I'm talking about. And performance approach goal, which is students' tendency to not necessarily learning for learning and improvement's sake, but to outperform others and demonstrate their competence. That's performance approach goal. And this is actually a maladaptive motivational pattern, performance avoidance goal, which is some students try to demonstrate achievement-related behavior. They engage in achievement-related behaviors, not necessarily either to improve their competence or to outperform others, but to not perform worse than others and show their incompetence in front of others. That's performance avoidance goal. So these four motivational beliefs are assessed in a very domain-specific manner, and they, as we hypothesized, significantly mediated the path from these perfectionism dimensions as stable individual characteristics to the maladaptive as well as adaptive achievement and performance indexes. So again, this, I hope, research demonstrates that these context-specific motivation beliefs are more important than individual characteristics that students bring into the learning and performance situation. So, what about contextual variations? Okay. We tested with 239 Korean middle school students whether their beliefs about the importance of ability and their perceptions of context also are mediated by students' achievement goal orientations. Okay? And the main dependent variable here was students' preference for challenging courses. So for example, their preference for challenging courses were assessed by items like this. I prefer classes that make me think really hard to those whose content could be easily memorized. Their preference for easy courses were assessed by this item, these type of items. I prefer classes that are boring but easy to those that are interesting but hard. Okay? So we assess students' beliefs about how much important ability is to enjoy success in the academic domain, importance of ability, as well as parental expectation, and school task and ability goal structure. School task goal structure is students' perception that in their school, learning and progress is more appreciated than performance per se, whereas the ability goal structure refers to their belief that in their school, relative ability is more appreciated than their progress in learning and effort per se, and the school sort of emphasize competition and winning over. And we, again, have the course preferences as a dependent variable. And we assess students' own mastery goal and performance goal as a mediating variable. These variables were correlated with each other, consistent with the prior research. Now, students' belief about the importance of ability makes students not pursue mastery goals and makes students avoid difficult, challenging courses. But it encourages students to prefer going for easy courses, although boring, nothing much to learn, still easy courses. Student perception that progress and ability is progress and effort is appreciated, predicted both their mastery goal adoption and performance goal adoption. But students' perception of ability goal emphasis only predicted their performance goal. And these achievement goal orientation predicted students' course preferences directly. So when students pursue mastery goal, try to improve their competence by learning new things, they were more willing to go for challenging tasks. Whereas when they strive to demonstrate their ability by performing better than others, they really prefer easy courses. Okay? So again, you see the significant mediation by context-specifically assessed motivation variables. All right, so most typically, I would argue that context-specific motivational beliefs function as mediators. So all these variables and sources interact with each other, but it is through these context-specific motivational beliefs that students' learning and achievement will be most heavily affected. Okay. All right, so conclusion. Walter Mischel in 1977 in his famous article published in American Psychologist, and I said, and I quote, "It is perfectly legitimate, interesting, and appropriate to study what people are like in general, like individual differences. If one is interested in such person perceptions, likewise, it is equally valid to study what people will do in specific situations if one is interested in that question." And I would argue educational psychologists, at least, are more interested in this latter question than the former question. And he said, each goal requires different strategies and provides somewhat different, albeit hopefully complementary insights. And he went on, but there is no reason to think that one will substitute for the other. The value of each depends in part, at least, on the investigator's purposes and types of generalizations sought. So coming back to the topic of my talk, context-specific regulation of motivation and learning, again, I would like to argue that students, and then ask you to realize that students form motivational beliefs in reference to specific activities, tasks, domains, as well as conditions under which they learn and perform. And therefore, if you're interested in students' learning and performance in these contexts, you have to assess students' motivation beliefs with these contexts in mind. These are all contexts. And such context-specific assessment offers greater implications for theory development and practice rather than broader assessment. So what we should remember is the question of functional significance. Again, Bendra and Pires argued that the most appropriate degree of context specificity depends on what you're trying to explain and predict as researchers as well as practitioners. And so the constructs of interest should be assessed in a way that is most psychologically relevant to the respondents in the given situation. And if you're interested in more of this line of research coming out of our lab, please visit our website, the Brain and Motivation Research Institute of Korea University. Here's a URL. And thank you very much for your attention.